On today's episode, we'll discuss the first Dallas Stars trade of the offseason and talk about another potential move that the team could make here over the next few weeks. Could the Dallas Stars be interested in signing Erik Karlsson? We'll discuss all of this on a Monday episode of Locked On Stars.
Your Locked On Stars, your daily podcast on the Dallas Stars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Howdy, Stars fans. Welcome back to the Locked On Stars podcast, the only daily podcast covering the Dallas Stars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Dane Lewis, your local expert on all things Dallas Stars hockey, coming to you on this Monday, June 19th. And whether this is your first time here or you are a recurring listener, thank you for stopping by and making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day. Be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. And of course, find and follow us on social media as well. At Dane_Lewis is my personal Twitter account. And you can search for the show's accounts as well. Just type in Locked On Stars on Instagram or Twitter. But we have plenty to discuss today. Of course, some speculation about whether or not the Dallas Stars could be interested in the services of San Jose Sharks defenseman Erik Karlsson. But before we dive into that, some news that we have to cover in terms of Stars roster personnel. Conveniently, shortly after I recorded on Thursday for Friday's episode, the Dallas Stars made a couple of announcements concerning some players on their roster. The first of those being forward Frederick Olofsson, or Freddie as he became known among Stars fans, has been traded to the Colorado Avalanche for everyone's favorite trade acquisition future considerations. So a move that feels a little underwhelming for the Dallas Stars right now, because we don't necessarily know what we will be receiving in exchange for the services of Freddie Olofsson, who made his debut in the National Hockey League this past season back on December 27th at Nashville with the Dallas Stars. He would go on to score just 1 goal and 3 assists, 4 points in 28 games played with the Stars, including a game-winning goal on New Year's Eve against the San Jose Sharks. One of the more thrilling and exciting games for the Stars all season long, and Freddie Olofsson playing a huge role in that contest, of course, with his goal mainly, but I believe he had an assist or two as well. Maybe his best game while wearing victory green for the Dallas Stars, but he is now going to be a member of the Avalanche, who are going to be looking to get a little bit more competitive this next season and hopefully add some depth. Really, the Avalanche's biggest flaw this season was injury, which they can only control to, some extent. They can't really control that their captain Gabriel Landeskog wasn't able to come back. Cale Makar missed some extended time, and they really just were lacking some depth at times, and especially in the postseason came back to bite them a little bit. So they're looking to add a guy like Freddie Olofsson, who will probably be no more than a fourth line player, just kind of like he was here in Dallas. But I don't say that in an offensive way or in an attacking way of Freddie, because I think that he was a very good player given the circumstances that he was having to play in and given the role that he was assigned for the Dallas Stars. I think he could be easily overlooked when you look at the personnel that the Stars had. He was such an absolute grinder. He played hard every single shift, because this is a guy who was in his mid-20s, who was just finally making his NHL debut. And I think he realized that he was going to have to earn his spot continually on the team. And I think he did that to a great degree for the majority of the season. And honestly, I think his play has warranted him to be a full-time NHL player, regardless of who he's playing for. So I imagine that Colorado sees that in him, and I hope for Freddie's sake that he gets that opportunity to be a full-time NHLer in the Avalanche organization. He doesn't necessarily score a ton of goals or rack up a ton of points, but he plays with such ferocity, plays with such heart and energy, and really was kind of a spark plug at times for the Stars organization and for the guys out there on the ice. I really do think that he's earned his way to be a full-time NHL player. He absolutely proved that he can hang in the NHL and go up against the competition on a night-to-night basis. And I can see him being a fit for the Avalanche, similar to former Dallas star Andrew Cogliano, who kind of filled that similar role of being a bottom six player, but played with tons of energy and passion. And the fan base really fell in love with a player like Cogs. And I think that it could be a similar fate for Freddie Olofsson in Colorado. It's just a shame that it's a divisional opponent, and the Stars could find themselves on the receiving end of that energy that Olofsson brings to the table. But that, with the departure of one player, that was part of the news. The other half of the news was a re-signed player. The Dallas Stars announced that they had re-signed goaltender Matt Murray to a 1-year, 2-way contract. He's 25 years old, mainly a member of the AHL Texas Stars this past season, but did make his NHL debut and play 3 games with the Dallas Stars this past year as well, including a win in his debut against the Chicago Blackhawks in relief of Jake Ottinger, while Scott Wedgwood was battling some injuries down the stretch late in the season. I think that Murray, while he did show some potential, he showed some flashes of talent. It was clear that he wasn't necessarily ready to make the jump to the NHL just yet, but desperate times called for desperate measures, and Jake Ottinger wasn't necessarily getting adequate rest anyway, but the Stars had to find a way to get him rest at some points, even with Scott Wedgwood battling some injuries, so he had to come up. I think, again, that he did well given the circumstances, and you know, it was a lot of times short notice that he was going to have to come up and play in the NHL, and a lot of starts, the majority of them, I think one was in Vancouver as well. They might have all been on the road, playing on the road, even though they might have been against, lottery teams or basement teams, whatever you want to call it. They're still NHL players, and they're going to be much better and much more difficult to stop than what you're seeing in the AHL on most nights. But I think that the experience in the long run was good for Matt Murray. He had a pretty good stint in the AHL during the regular season, and the playoffs was a huge reason for the Texas Stars' success in getting into the Calder Cup tournament and competing in the postseason. And I think the ideal scenario for Matt Murray this year with his new 1-year, 2-way contract is to get another full season of work in the American Hockey League, while Jake Ottinger and Scott Wedgwood are hopefully able to stay healthy and hold things down in the NHL. And hopefully, again, if heaven forbid someone gets hurt at the NHL level, you do know that Murray isn't completely fresh and won't be, a complete newbie going into an NHL game. He has that experience, and hopefully with the work over the summer and whatever work he's able to get in preseason, and best case scenario, again, he doesn't get called up to the NHL, but we know that he certainly is serviceable and can go out there. But I think the best case scenario is he gets that one more year in the AHL, playing in the minor leagues with the Texas Stars, while Jake and Scott hold things down in the NHL, because Scott Wedgwood is going into the final year of his deal. He signed an extension with the Stars last season, a couple years for $1 million a season. He's going into the final year of that contract. And so I'm curious to see, maybe once that expires, if the Stars are going to look to move on from Scott Wedgwood, who is, a little bit later on in his career, in his 30s, but depending on how he plays, maybe the Stars would look to keep Scott Wedgwood a little bit longer. Or if Matt Murray shows that he's ready, you then have Jake Ottinger still at the number 1, but then you have a different goalie in Matt Murray who can come up and play that backup role in his mid to late 20s. And, you have a little bit more of a fresh player who isn't as worn down, not as much wear and tear. Of course, that's going to be a discussion for a different day. I'm very much excited to see what Jake and Scott Wedgwood can do in the NHL this season, but also excited knowing that the Stars see potential in Matt Murray and that they've looked to extend him. And it seems like they have plans for him to be a part of this organization for the next few seasons. But the Stars seem to always have good, adequate, if not above adequate goaltending most times. So Matt Murray, excited to have him back and excited to see what the future holds for him as he looks to hopefully have one more good year in the AHL before maybe making the jump to being a full-time NHL goalie, maybe in the backup role for Jake Ottinger this time next year. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk about some trade speculation. It is that time of year as teams look to improve themselves and get ready to run at the Stanley Cup for the 23-24 campaign. And one of the hottest names on the trade market right now is defenseman Erik Karlsson. Could the Dallas Stars be interested in acquiring a player with Karlsson's skill set? We'll talk about that coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Stars is brought to you by our friends at eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. And it's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors with eBay Guaranteed Fit. You can be sure that every part fits just right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. I want to thank you again for making Locked On Stars your first listen every single day. For all the everydayers out there making our show a part of your daily routine, thank you for tuning in, especially here in the offseason where there's still plenty to discuss in the world of Dallas Stars hockey. Just because players aren't out there on the ice doesn't mean that there's not drama or things to discuss, especially in the world of the trade market, as we're probably going to start seeing some more trades here over the next few weeks now that the NHL season has officially reached a conclusion and teams are going to start preparing for the next campaign in search of winning the Stanley Cup at the end of June. And one of the spiciest names out there on the trade market right now, amongst plenty of other likely trades that we're going to see this offseason, is defenseman Erik Karlsson, who is likely going to be the winner of the Norris Trophy from this past season for his efforts with the Sharks. 25 goals, 76 assists, 101 points for defensemen in 82 games played, which was just such an anomaly to see. No one was expecting this type of season from Erik Karlsson, not because Karlsson hasn't shown to be a good player in the past, but because he had seemed to be a little bit on the decline and was a member of the San Jose Sharks, who we all know are currently in the early stages of a rebuild. And so it was weird to not just see Erik Karlsson perform the way that he had, but to see him do it on a team that was out of the playoff discussion by Thanksgiving. But the Sharks know that they have Karlsson as a valuable asset, not just on the ice, but I think now they recognize that his value means more to them off the ice and that they could get a pretty nice return after this season that Karlsson just had. Even though he's 33 years old, his stock has increased exponentially. And if the Sharks wait past this season, that stock could plummet and they could either be stuck holding on to Karlsson for the next 4 years until his contract expires, or they might not be able to get as much in exchange for Karlsson's services, whether that be draft picks, prospects, or NHL players. So you would imagine that the Sharks would look to sell right now, while the value for Erik Karlsson is probably the highest that it will be at the remainder of his current contract, which is going to be the trickiest part of getting him moved. The contract clocks in at $11.5 million, and it won't come to an end until the summer of 2027. There's also a no-move clause on the contract, so Erik Karlsson would need to approve the team or city that he would be traded to. This isn't just the Sharks looking to make a deal with anybody. This would have to be a trade with the team that Erik Karlsson would be interested in going to. And you have to imagine at age 33, and given the talent that he's been able to play with, you would believe and probably be right that he wants to go to a contending club. And so even during the trade deadline, during the season, there were plenty of rumors that he could potentially be on the move to a team like Edmonton. Never really Dallas was in discussion, but a lot of teams out east seemed to be in contention for the services of Erik Karlsson in their efforts to bolster their roster in order to make a run at the Stanley Cup. But there was never a move, probably because of that massive contract coming in at $11.5 million with no end until 2027. And so the Dallas Stars are a team that, if you look in the right places, there's some cases to be made for them potentially looking to trade for the services of Erik Karlsson. And it makes sense because the Stars, probably their biggest need and their biggest area of concern this offseason is on the blue line. They want to look to add some better defensemen to the roster in order to have that more complete lineup on a night-to-night basis. And Karlsson would come in and easily provide an instant boost from the blue line from an offensive standpoint. And he could also, in theory, mesh very well with the Stars' premier defenseman, Miro Heiskanen, who primarily shoots from the left side, and Erik Karlsson shoots from the right side. So that could be a match made in heaven. You could have two threatening defensemen who, granted, they play different styles of hockey at their current junctures of their career, but it could be a nice mixture of having Miro Heiskanen finally being able to play consistently in the position that he needs to be in, and then a guy like Erik Karlsson who seemingly is comfortable playing just about wherever. He was not playing with the best talent in the world this past season in San Jose, yet he was still able to have one insane season, especially, again, from an offensive standpoint with those 101 points in 82 games played. Just for a reference, Jason Robertson finished with 109 points as a forward. Karlsson, again, clocking in as a defenseman. Just unreal offensive production from Erik Karlsson, and certainly could provide a boost to the Stars' blue line, which can be lacking offense at times. Heiskanen did take some steps in that direction this season, and you would hope that you could see a little bit of that from Thomas Harley, Niels Lundqvist, but from some of the other defensemen, you're not getting as much of that offensive production as you'd like to see. And Karlsson could also slot in very nicely on the Stars' offensive special teams. Imagine a scenario on the power play where you have Miro Heiskanen leading that top group, and then if they don't score somehow, then you get that second group being headlined by Erik Karlsson running that second power play unit. That would be a dynamic 1-2 punch. That would be so much fun to watch and see the chemistry bond between those two. Miro Heiskanen, currently one of the best defensemen in the NHL, and I guess you could say that for Karlsson as well. He's always been respected and highly regarded as one of the better D-men in the league, and I think it would make for an interesting duo, and certainly something that I know that Pete DeBoer probably has thought about, and even to some extent Jim Nill in the front office. There's been some history with the Stars and Erik Karlsson in the past. Back when Ottawa was looking to move on from Karlsson before he eventually got sent to San Jose, there were rumblings that the Stars were interested in Erik Karlsson, but the deal ended up falling through because the Sharks were interested in Miro Heiskanen, and rightfully so. The Stars were not interested in moving on from Heiskanen in exchange for Karlsson, so the deal never happened. So clearly there's been interest in the past between the Stars and Karlsson, and again, if Karlsson's looking to move to a contender, I think Dallas certainly would fit the billing, coming off an appearance in the Western Conference Final and looking to run it back this upcoming season with a very similar roster with a lot of the key players that made this past season so successful. So there's definitely a case to be made why Karlsson coming to Dallas would make sense and why it would work both for him and the Stars organization as a whole. But there's also quite a few red flags and some reasons why the Stars probably shouldn't pursue a player like Erik Karlsson. And I'm going to discuss some of those reasons here with you coming up next. Closing out today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you again for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day as we continue to talk about the idea of defenseman Erik Karlsson heading to Dallas this summer via trade. And we just spent a few minutes talking about the fun side of this trade, of having Karlsson and Heiskanen potentially playing on the same defensive pair, Karlsson being the second go-to option on the power play for the Stars. If Heiskanen and his unit aren't able to score, there's a ton of offensive potential with the addition of a player of Karlsson's caliber. However, there are several reasons why I think that the Dallas Stars will not pursue Erik Karlsson this offseason. For starters, and I mean, I'll dive into the contract and the money side of things here in a second, but my concerns go even beyond that. As great as Karlsson is on offense, his defensive skills are lacking despite being a defenseman. He didn't play on the penalty kill for the San Jose Sharks this past year, and he is a career -103 on the plus-minus rating, which isn't the end-all be-all, but there have been some concerns with Erik Karlsson's defensive play and with his health over the past few seasons. As you know, he was able to play a full 82-game schedule this past year, but that hasn't always been the case for Karlsson over the past handful of seasons, and certainly would be a concern for any team looking to acquire him this offseason. So you mix in some potential health issues with the fact that he doesn't necessarily play the best defense. And I think that could be a red flag for a team looking to bolster their defensive core like the Stars. They do, like I said, have some of those offensive weapons, but really when we talk about needing to improve the blue line, it's really more on the defensive side of things. As the Stars found themselves a lot of times, if Heiskanen wasn't out there on the ice, you kind of felt like there was a liability defensively at times, unless it was guys playing just really locked down focus, but sometimes guys weren't fully healthy, or sometimes the offense was just too overwhelming. And Karlsson, while he might be able to provide a spark offensively, wouldn't necessarily be what the Dallas Stars are looking for from a defensive standpoint. Granted, he also hasn't been playing with the best defensive teams over the past handful of seasons, especially in San Jose, if they've been deep in this rebuild. Maybe if he's surrounded by some better defensive talent in terms of his, fellow defensemen, and from the offensive side of things, maybe he would fare a little bit better defensively, and he wouldn't have to bear as much of the weight, which could potentially help. But that's still, that minus 103 for a career is a little bit concerning for me when you talk about adding a player like Karlsson to the lineup. And also, and I touched on it a second ago, and it really goes without saying for any team looking to sign Erik Karlsson, or rather acquire him via trade, that contract would be an absolute nightmare to work with, as the cap hit is, again, $11.5 million from now until the end of the 26-27 season. Even if the San Jose Sharks were willing to retain some of the salary, let's say 30% a retention for Erik Karlsson's salary, that would still only bring it down to around $8 million, which the Stars still wouldn't be able to accommodate right now with around $7.4 million in cap space. It would be incredibly difficult, and you'd have to ask the Sharks to potentially retain even more, which they might not be willing to do. But again, it would depend on, who or what you would be sending in return. And the Dallas Stars don't necessarily have the best options in terms of a return right now. No first or third round draft pick in this year's draft. How much do they value that second round pick? Is that something they'd be willing to part ways with? And which prospects would they be willing to part ways with? Because that's what the San Jose Sharks would be mostly interested in, is draft picks and prospects. But the Stars do have a nice handful of prospects on their team, guys like Stankoven and Bork, who we are hoping will make their NHL debuts this season, where you could potentially see them make an impact at the NHL level. You would not want the Stars to move on from those players, but then it's really a matter of who else could you trade and who would the Sharks be interested in. And you'd probably also have to make some other moves on the NHL roster. Of course, we've talked about on this podcast already the idea of buying out Ryan Suter. The buyout period opened up a few days ago on June 16th and lasts until June 30th. So if the Stars are going to buy out Ryan Suter, that needs to happen before the end of the month. You potentially would maybe have to either buy out, or not buy out, but trade a contract like Colin Miller or Yanni Hakanpää, and then potentially look to offload a different contract of a player like a Radek Faksa, or someone, a forward who, isn't necessarily producing a ton, but still takes on a decent amount of the cap hit, with Fox's contract coming in a little over $3 million a season. It would be very, very messy, and the Stars would have to move a lot of pieces, and would probably have to settle with the fact that that would be their only move this offseason. So all of that to say, I personally would love to have a player like Karlsson on the roster. The talent is there offensively. I think there's plenty of pros for having a player like him, but I don't think the Stars will do it. And ultimately, I think that that's probably the right decision, as I think the Stars could afford to add a few different pieces to the roster. They might not be as flashy or shiny as a player like Erik Karlsson, but I think with the right moves and the right coaching adjustments with Pete DeBoer and his staff, I still think the Stars could form a formidable defensive core that can still produce and still play sound defense. They might not be able to produce offensively to the levels of Erik Karlsson, but it's also not a guarantee that Karlsson is going to score 100 points in a season ever again. It's incredibly difficult to do. And even if he is surrounded by a better team, his numbers might still lack, because he was putting up all those numbers, again, because he was the go-to guy and he was shouldering a lot of that weight for the team in San Jose, where he might not have to do that if going to play somewhere else. And he's probably going to be a second fiddle depending on where he goes. That would definitely be the case if he came to Dallas. He would definitely not overtake Miro Heiskanen as the number one defenseman. And so he might not be interested in that. He might want to go somewhere where he could be the number one defenseman, perhaps a place like Edmonton, which is another location that he has been rumored to potentially be linked to this offseason if teams are looking to make a trade. But if you're watching on YouTube, let me know in the comment section down below. Do you think that the Dallas Stars should trade for Erik Karlsson? Why or why not? But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Stars. Thank you so much again for tuning in and making us your first listen every single day. Be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcasting platform of choice. We are always free and available no matter where or how you choose to listen. But I hope you guys enjoy your Monday and have a great start to your week. And I hope that you will tune in throughout the rest of the week as we continue our offseason content. Probably got a few more player evaluations coming your way, as well as maybe some other trade rumors, free agent rumors, and a ton of speculation as we get ready for the excitement of the offseason with players on the move and new teams starting to take form and take shape with new additions to their rosters. But I hope you guys enjoy your Monday. Take care of yourselves, and we will see you back here tomorrow.